Hey guys, it's Mystical Storms here with part 2, chapter 2 of Colorblind in a Vibrant World. This is the aftermath, so yeah. The summary is, what happens after a time-looping quirk holds you hostage for a little over a month? Let's find out. So yeah, without further notice, let's start. My lord, the good doctor squeaked out, clipboard and pen in hand, even as the man bowed low. All for One waved his hand, and the man straightened and cleared his throat, and began his report. Subject 5441-09 was successfully able to recognize 2 UA students and force them through the USJ attack at a total of 37 times. Their psyche was obviously affected by the events as reported by our spy, and were able to break out of the loop back. Currently, I'm not sure what made them break out of it, but I do have theories that will require additional testing. All for One hummed lightly, growing increasingly annoyed with the good doctor. If he wasn't the best doctor All for One had found in the past 50 years that was willing to let go of many ethical and moral standards, he would have already disposed of this meek man standing before him. Nevertheless, All for One was not excited when he learned that UA was now comfortable breeding assassins, or at least that's how the 2 herolings were described, and had tried to take away 2 of their long-term projects. He's lucky that he had his own untrackable warping quirk, since Kirigiri and young Shigaraki were not in a position to escape from the police after the attack. All for One even had to let the good doctor place young Shigaraki in a Nomu tank to restore his body back to an appropriate health level before All for One could transfer the copy of the decayed quirk he had on hand. How the young heroling managed to figure out how the 5-finger contact-based quirk could be combated through his spinal cord, he was not sure. The one thing he is sure of is that he doesn't want his young successor to be part of these loops again, until they figure out a sure way to eliminate the children playing heroes responsible. So, he let himself turn slightly to address the man that looked more like a greasy street rat than a human inside. Run as many experiments as you can with them. I would like to see you use one of the children as a constant. I also expect you to refrain yourself from interfering with any missions Shigaraki leads as you do so, he said, humming to himself as he mulled over everything he wanted to know about. The good doctor hurriedly breathed, "Of course, sir," as he bowed again, though he knew better than to run off before All for One dismissed him. The man felt his curiosity pique as taught about the loops they had put 2 of the students through, and addressed the doctor again. Doctor, All for One said, a bit giddy. "Have you figured out what their peak emotion was?" The doctor just hurriedly flipped through the papers and this wooden clipboard and scanned the information quickly. "Ah," the man said, obviously nervous. "That's one of the things that required additional testing. The emotion that read through was similar to excitement or anger." The doctor spoke hurriedly, presumably trying to get back into All for One's good graces. "Since every other loopback has come back with feelings of depression or hurt, I thought it'd be best to test them again and assume these readings are faulty until proven otherwise." All for One just hummed his agreement and waved the good doctor away. Listening to the man scurry away and slammed the door closed on his way out, All for One released a harsh breath and began planning out different scenarios for children to go through. And he was going to break their psyche and enjoy disposing of them, especially since they had the gall to call themselves heroes and enjoy torturing his experiments. A knock A knock on the hospital door brought Izuku back to the real world. He frowned as it opened, not wanting to deal with any human interaction that wasn't Denki right now. Alas, no doctor or nurse was actually given him and Denki any alone time since they broke out of the time loop a day ago. Apparently, being surrounded by death and destruction for more than a month was bound to leave some form of repercussions on the body. Granted, the most they got were fading scars, and Izuku had a few bones that had healed wrong, so those were promptly rebroken and healed by the staff, and Denki had to deal with giving 5 million different brain scans to make sure he hadn't overloaded his system because of his quirk with his new techniques. Honestly, the boys found it hilarious, since his technique was actually much safer than what it had been now that he wasn't in danger or short-circuited all the time. Izuku brought himself out of his thoughts as he felt Denki's hand run through his hair and smiled softly, completely ignoring whoever decided to walk in. He was in Denki's hospital bed, laying across it with his feet dangling off the sides and his head on Denki's lap. Denki said that he was trying to count Izuku's freckles, but he's not sure if he believed that, since the boy seemed to be more infatuated with his hair. Not that he minded. A pointed cough made Izuku frown again. He really didn't want to deal with another stupid doctor trying to take Denki away for pointless tests. Denki pulled his face away and looked over to the doctor as Izuku sat up and did the same. Standing at the doorway, Aizawa-sensei was next to the man in a trench coat, and both of them were pointedly looking away from Izuku and Denki. The two boys grinned at each other and rolled their eyes playfully. Honestly, they all know that the two were isolated together for a while. What did they expect from them? Both of them were touch-starved and affectionate. It's simple math, and at least in Izuku's eyes. Yes? Denki asked teasingly, still internally laughing at both of the man's reaction. Aizawa-sensei just turned to them and sighed before walking further in the room. This is Detective Tsukashi Naomasa. He is here to take your statement about what happened. Aizawa-sensei sat down in his chair across from them and furrowed his eyebrows before adding, "You don't have to do the statement today, though." Izuku just looked over to Denki and tilted his head, asking in a silent question. Denki nodded a bit and grasped Izuku's hand, squeezing it tight. Izuku squeezed back, agreeing that they were ready to do this, and turned back to look at the detective, who had taken off his trench coat and draped it around the back of the chair. He looked nice enough, with soft brown eyes and pleasant smile. He held a tape recorder in one hand and a small notebook in the other, as he sat down and spoke. "It's nice to meet you, boys. Would you like some water before we get started?" Izuku glanced over to Denki before shaking their heads. They should be good for the time being, unless they want details. Fuck. Well, we'll be fine, Detective, Izuku said, almost smiling, but then deciding against it. He had smiled once at a nurse, and she promptly ran off. He didn't know what had changed about his smile, but he wasn't planning on doing it again until he found a mirror. Just one question, though. How much detail do you want from us? Denki squeezed his hand once again, and Izuku squeezed back, letting his eyes flicker nervously towards Aizawa-sensei. He wasn't keen on remembering the different ways his teacher and classmates had died, especially since Denki was still queasy about his friend's death. Not that Izuku would ever blame him. It was a new level of fucked up when they could remember the feel of their classmates' blood against their skin, even though others wouldn't know about it. Izuku was just glad he didn't get sick all that often, and vomiting was one of the once every few year kind of deal, or else he would be throwing up every 10 minutes. The detective softened, and he placed his stuff down on his lap. As much detail as you want. Obviously, we need to know the events from your perspective, but we won't require to talk. We won't require to talk about anything that happened. This is just a statement. Izuku nodded and felt Denki relax a bit. Good. It wouldn't do. It wouldn't do for the both of them to be nervous about this. At least they had Aizawa Sensei's word that this detective was a good one. Izuku was anxious about meeting a new person, but his teacher trusted them. Then he would relax a bit and try to force out what he knew. Case file 004-B23091-C54 Audio recording playing. 00:13:47 minutes. D. Once you figured out what you can contact the outside world, what did you do? Retracted 01. Well, continued. Retracted 01. Yeah, we continued with the loops. D. That's pinging as both a lie and a truth. Can you explain? Retracted 02. Oh, right. We did try to explain to someone what was going to happen. I think the 5th time, or maybe it was the 6th, but they didn't believe it. After that, we just continued with the loops like usual and didn't say anything. D. True. I see. What happened during that loop? Redacted 01. I kind of laughed at him when the villains showed up before we jumped off the platform and fought the villains. Redacted 02. Yeah, we didn't really say anything about the time loop though, just that the villains were going to attack. D. True, both statements. Thank you. AS. HNC 02-5886. Was that me? Did you tell me? 5 seconds silent recorded. ASHNC 02-5886. I see. Excuse me, detective. I'll be right back. Case file 004-B23091-C54. Audio recording playing. 00:53:12 minutes. D. True. Was there anything else you'd like to add about the time loops before we talk about your last loop? No, I think we covered most of it. D. True. Alright. Was there any other resets from the time loops other than your deaths? We're not exactly sure. Redacted 02. We're not exactly sure. D. True. Can you elaborate? Redacted 01. Yeah, there were a few times we skipped school just to see what would happen, but as soon as the USJ attack was supposed to start, we both passed out and woke up in the morning. Usually it was our deaths that triggered a new loop, but apparently our absence also triggered a new loop, so we aren't really sure. True. D. True. Thank you. Case file 00-B23091-C54. Audio recording playing. 1 hour, 4 minutes, and 54. D. True. Now can you explain why you attempted to disable Shigaraki? Redacted 02. Muttering. Why the fuck wouldn't we? He was rude. Muttering. Redacted 01. Muttering. Fuck if I know. Redacted 01. Detective. Shigaraki killed at least 2 people per loop. If I did the math, I wouldn't be surprised if his average was 3 or 4 deaths per loop, not counting his support from the Nomu. That being said, I'm not really sure how you want us to answer to that. D. True. I'll see if I can explain it better. The tactics you two use are usually considered extreme force or torture methods. Redacted 01 and Redacted 02. I suppose our questions could also be worded, why did you disable Shigaraki with a method that you use? Redacted 02. Muttering. D. I apologize. Redacted 02. I can't hear you. Redacted 01. He said, call it desperation, detective. D. True. Redacted 01. I'm sorry, detective. Can we continue this some other time? D. Of course, redacted 01. Audio recording finished. 1 hour, 6 minutes, and 24 seconds. Izuku sighed to himself, still shitty about the fact that Kurogiri and Shigaraki had gotten away from the police custody. It felt like all of their hard work just went down the drain. On top of that, they didn't even have proof of their hard work other than their faded scars and memories, and while Denki brought up a good point, they had absolutely no idea what to do now. How does one regenerate? How does one reintegrate back into society when they never really left? How do they go back and face their friends and family after something like this? Aizawa-sensei said he would help, but apparently that just means more homework for the pair. The man had said that they would both need an extra ethics and morals class, which will be taught and tailored for the two of them after classes let out for the day. Honestly, Izuku can't even see the real need for them to have the class. "Izuku!" his mother yelled out, before opening the door and giving him a wide smile that didn't reach her eyes. "Honey, I thought we talked about leaving your door open from now on." Izuku nodded and looked down. He still didn't know what was wrong with his smile, since his mom had refused to leave him alone as soon as they left the hospital. So he didn't exactly smile and reassure her he didn't mean to close the door, and also had to make sure that his face wouldn't dip into a grimace at the reminder. He hasn't been alone since the fucking hospital. It's been 2 days. 2 days of being watched like a hawk, everything who walks around the house, 48 painful hours of dealing with his mother constantly opening the doors that he closed out of habit, including the fucking bathroom. Izuku and his mother are not close enough for that. If Izuku was being honest, staying in the house away from Denki for so long has made him feel crazier than ever. He had to deal with the time loop quirk for Kami's sake. Instead of saying any of that though, he nodded and let his head fall in submission, before letting out a meek, "We did, I'm sorry." And he held himself back from the grimace as his defeated tone. He heard his mother walk over to him and ruffle his hair. That was a cue to look up and see the terrible fake smile of her on her face. Perhaps she was going for comfort and understanding right now. That didn't really matter though, because none of it reached her eyes. "It's all right, sweetie," she said in a sickening sweet voice. Izuku had held himself back from cringing once he heard it. "Dinner would be ready in an hour or so. Okay? Just take it easy for now." Izuku nodded once again and averted his eyes when she led in and kissed his forehead. Before walking out of the room. When she was gone and out of sight, Izuku let out a deep breath and resisted the urge to groan. All he had to do was play his part, and he'd be able to go back to UA tomorrow and let himself grin a little bit at the thought of seeing Denki again. He couldn't wait. It took a full hour and a half, 4 promises and a fucking tracker in his phone to convince his mother to take the train to UA and go to school for the day. The annoyance was worth it though, since Izuku would be able to be near Denki again soon. Apparently, the blonde's parents were insistent on driving him to school, so Izuku took the morning to relax for a bit. He even stopped to get himself some coffee from a coffee shop before he reached the school. According to his mother, coffee was a gateway to drinking and drugs and gangs. According to Izuku, coffee was an essential to life. So there he was, enjoying this morning and sipping on his life juice before All Might came around the corner and grinning excitedly at him and called out, "Young Midoriya." Izuku honestly had to hold the urge to sigh and cry all at once. Of course, he still loved his mentor. He still cared for the man who had made him into a hero in training that he was, still adored the hero and held so much respect for him. But a large part of him was still bitter about the USJ. It's still a fresh wound that hasn't been closed yet. Izuku has heard and seen villains kill his friends and teacher in the name of getting All Might to come and save them so many times this past month that he just can't look at his mentor the same as he used to. And crying to his mentor's voice and his alarm clock did not help the complicated feeling he was currently going through. It hurt more than he thought. It would to finally see his mentor again, and that was a revelation Izuku did not want to deal with this morning. So he tried to smile, close-lipped. He didn't know why, but he knows that he shouldn't show his teeth, and All Might seemed to falter. He let the attempt of a smile slip on his face and nodded towards the man instead of a greeting. All Might grinned wider and nodded back before walking up to him. "Would you like to join me for tea after school today, young Midoriya?" Izuku nodded back and said, "Of course, All Might Sensei, that sounds great." He didn't try to smile, but the enthusiasm in his words seemed to smooth together tense from the hero's shoulder. They said quick goodbyes, and Izuku finally allowed himself to sigh as he continued walking to the UA halls towards his classroom. He sipped on his coffee, almost cried when he finished it, glaring at the cup like it was personally offended him for failing to beat a nerve-ending supply of caffeine. Once he got to the classroom door, he could hear his classmates yelling and banging on something. He could also hear Ida's voice shouting over the crowd noises as he tried to get the class back in order. Izuku let his hand rest on the door, idly watching it shake just a bit. He was nervous to see them again. He knew how much he had changed, but his classmates didn't. Thinking back to the last loop, he wasn't sure how much they saw, but he was certain it was enough to be wary of him for now. Izuku just shook his head and slipped open the door in one go. The saying is something about ripping the band-aid off in one go, right? As soon as the door slid open, all eyes were on him, and the noise had grown silent. His classmates took him in, presumably looking at a few of his new scars that stood white against his tanned skin. His friends smiled wide, and Uraraka stepped forward as if to hug him or something. Before she could do anything, Denki jumped out of his seat, Izuku locking eyes with him and grinned, which was the only cue Denki needed to fly into his arms. Izuku wondered if Denki had to use his quirk to manipulate the electromagnetic field around him so he could move that fast, but he didn't think about it for too long, since Denki was finally back in his arms. He was lucky they had worked out so much, and Izuku finally realized the importance of leg day, or else they both would have been sprawled out on the floor instead, though Izuku caught Denki and spun them once with the leftover momentum and held the other boy close. Tears sprung to his eyes as he breathed in deeply, taking the smell and feel of Denki once again. He felt Denki do the same as he hid his face in Izuku's neck and breathed deeply before sighing contently. Izuku let himself walk forward 2 steps with Denki still in arms, kicked the door closed. No one but his classmates need to see this. He wasn't practically fond of open doors at this point, as if kicking the door shut was the equivalent of popping a small bubble of peace. All at once his classmates made their way over to them and started shouting out ways too many questions. He felt his face heat up with Mina's wolf whistle at them and groan as he buried his face in Denki's shoulder. He let himself groan even louder when he felt Denki start to laugh a bit at his dramatics. Izuku let himself completely ignore Ida as his friends tried to explain the rules of PDA. He was in no mood to let Denki go. Someone was going to have to pry him away, or Denki was going to have to want to let go. Those were the only 2 options at this point. And no one else seemed to have an issue with it. They were all talking at the pair like this was a normal occurrence, and didn't really care about it as long as they got their answers. Well, except for Mineta. He looked oddly annoyed and grossed out. Jesus, they really should have just let that one loop happen, huh? Izuku let himself roll his eyes before he held up a hand surprisingly. It didn't take long for everyone to quiet down. Once very quiet, Denki dropped his legs from around Izuku's waist and detached himself from Izuku, although he still held his hand tightly. Not Izuku ever mind. They looked out at their classmates, and Izuku sighed before glancing at the clock. They had a few minutes, so might as well give them some details. All right. Izuku sighed and slightly squeezed Denki's hand when he saw the grin Ashta was wearing. One question at a time. We'll tell you if we can't or don't want to answer, okay? A chorus of excitement and determined agreement rang out, and Izuku did his best not to groan when Ida was the first one to start yelling questions. They didn't end up telling their classmates too much, just the bare bones of what had been going on for the past month for them. The rest of their classmates seemed to be smart enough to put together the puzzle pieces, though, since they all started eyeing Izuku and Denki's visible, life-threatening scars with somber looks. At least they had the decency to stray away from the topic once they noticed how uncomfortable they were talking about how they had gotten them. Izuku wasn't sure what his classmates' reaction would be if he ever told them just how many times Izuku and Denki had thrown a loop away just so they would be the ones getting killed instead of their classmates. At this point, their deaths meant nothing to them, but their classmates' deaths, those were always the hardest to bear witness to. In class came and went, although Aizawa was still looking at Denki and Izuku like some sort of sad puzzle that he didn't have all the pieces to. He seemed to take it especially hard when they told him and the detective that he hadn't listened to their worries about the field trip and subsequently deterred them from ever asking for help again. Izuku and Denki didn't want him to worry though. Izuku already had his own trust issues with adults and teachers in general, so he wasn't all that confused as why Aizawa had brushed him off. Denki was obviously hopeful that Aizawa would help them, but he was clearly used to the same treatment and only huffed an annoyance at both of their teachers and situation before he bounced back. But both of the boys' annoyance didn't last long. They had seen their teacher killed too many times for them to simply stay mad at him or his unwillingness to believe they were more than just paranoid, so neither of them really held any sort of grudge towards the man. If Izuku and Denki learned anything, it's that Aizawa would do anything to protect his students with his life no matter what. And then suddenly a loud yell from Bakugo got the attention of both of the boys that had planned to just stay inside the classroom for lunch today, and their classmates seemed to understand this was the first new day of school they've had in a month. They needed a bit of a break from more people. As luck would have it, more people were standing in front of their classroom door, blocking 1A from being able to leave for lunch. Apparently, some decided to declare war against the whole class for the sports festival. Izuku honestly forgot that was a thing, despite the fact that all his classmates had been talking about it since Izuku honestly forgot that was a thing, despite the fact that all of his classmates had been talking once Aizawa was done with the announcements. And then Bakugo decided to start screaming, which was annoying but effective. The crowd seemed to peter out until some idiot tried to blame his classmates for the attack, the USJ attack, the fucking attack that had dictated his life and Denki's for the past 37 days. Before he even knew, Izuku had gotten up and out of his seat to stalk forward towards the crowd. Amusingly enough, his classmates all stepped to the side for him, and once the crowd could see him, he smiled. Of course, he still had no idea what was going on with a smile, but he was glad to see. Most of the crowd looked uneasy and had taken a step taken a full step back once they saw him. Are you jealous of a villain attack? Izuku asked, mirror dancing in his eyes, and his smile promised pain. The blonde boy, why is it always blondes, just scoffed and dramatically turned his body to angle himself both away from Izuku to address the crowd. Please, I could never be jealous of of the losers of Class 1A. At least Class 1B had 1B has enough sense to not be attacked. Ah, deflection and degradation. How original, Izuku muttered to himself, holding himself back from rolling his eyes at the offended look he was getting from this overdramatic child, although he did allow himself to smile wider at the giggle coming from behind him. And the giggles coming from behind him. Is your entire class always this arrogant? A smooth voice drawled from the outskirts. Izuku glanced over to see a lanky boy with purple hair and a lazy smirk in place. Izuku just grinned in response to the question. Huh, who are you calling arrogant? Bakugo yelled, tiny pops coming from his hand. Never mind, Dad. I suppose I'm here to say the same as my classmates just did. Although she failed to mention that the entrance exam isn't the only way to get into the hero course. Anyone can use the sport festival to move into the hero course, so consider this my declaration of war if you'd like. He finishes rubbing the back of his neck. Izuku let himself stare at the other boy. Thanks, Izuku yelled as he walks over the purple boy. He felt Denki come up behind him. A small amount of tension left his shoulder. Turning to the other boy, he spoke. We've got a gym booked out for the next few weeks. If you'd like to come with us, you look like you could use it. Excuse me? The boy asked, obviously defensive. Denki smiled widened as Izuku answered, well, we don't want to be disappointed if you can't follow through with your declaration, and besides, we need a better purple classmate anyway. Yeah, Denki chimed in, eagerly wrapping his arms around Izuku as they both ignored the offended squawk coming from Mineta. You need to bulk up, so come on. We'll talk about it over lunch. The boy just rolled his eyebrows and tilted his head a bit. What, are you just wanting a charity case? Izuku just scoffed as they continued. Oh, please. That's not what we want. Izuku turned to look at the boy in the eyes, and he let his smile become a touch more feral than it already was. We want a challenge. OMAKE. Ethics and Morals class with Shota, Izuku, and Denki. Denki snorted at Izuku stared confused at the whiteboard. Why are we talking about the trolley problem? Izuku asked, sending his baffled and confused look over to Aizawa. Their teacher just sighed and gestured at the problem that was written out. I like to see how you feel about this before we start with the bigger concepts. Think of this as me getting to know your baseline for now. Izuku, still confused, just nodded and looked back down into his notebook. The pages were blissfully blank, although his mind was running at 100 miles per hour. Even before this all happened, when he was a kid, he knew that his questions for the trolley problem were one that most didn't bother himself with. He had found an online forum that talked about it and agreed on different sides, but no one talked about all the other options. The problem question only gives the following information. There is a runway trolley barreling down the railway track. Ahead of the track, there are 5 people tied up and unable to move. The trolley is headed straight for them. You are standing some distance off in a train yard next to the lever. If you pull the lever, the trolley will switch to a different set of tracks. However, you notice that there is one person on the side track. You have 2 options. Do nothing, in which case the trolley will kill 5 people on the main track. Pull the lever, divert the trolley onto the side track where it kills 1 person. Which is the most ethical option? Or more simply, which one is the right thing to do? First off, what are the only 2 options for Izuku to choose from? Is he too stupid to think of flipping the lever, dashing in, and grabbing 1 person to safety so a trolley can run freely? And although it's a dark thought, it did it needed to be taken into account. What can these people offer the world? Obviously, Izuku would know all life has value and people can't play with others' life like this. But if he ignores that for a second, what can they do? Are there 5 villains who will just be murdering people and endangering them without remorse once they're saved? Is one person a hero, a child, a mother? Are there outside forces that convinces the 5 people to stand there, knowing that someone would have to make a choice? Is there a person potentially coerce all 6 people actually the villain and just watching the inevitable fallout from behind the shadows, playing with civilians' lives for fun? On top of that, does Izuku have enough strength to merely step in front of the trolley and stop it by changing the tracks and hitting anyone? Does he have a quirk in this situation? What quirk would he have, if not his own? Is he quirkless? Is everyone quirkless? If everyone is quirkless, is it a hate crime or just a quirkless world? If it was just quirkless world, why wasn't anyone contacting the conductor on a trolley? Is the conductor a villain looking to end any number of lives on their own amusement? Is there even a conductor on the trolley? Or does a runaway mean there's no life in there? The problem is too open-end to accurately solve in Izuku's question about the problem just piling up, and the trolley problem just doesn't make sense to him. It never has. And if he has forgotten bad people involved for a second, this is going to happen to the trolley. Logically, letting on a main track would be easier for everyone involved, so they could follow it and potentially shut it down. Letting it skirt off to the side track would probably help with transport though, since the name implies that a trolley doesn't use a sidetrack all that much, and that they could fix the issue without dealing with any other trolley being backed up and waiting. Now, tossing the people back into the equation, what would happen to the trolley? Is there a force hitting the 5 people going to be enough to slow it down? Would it come to a natural stop, or would it just keep going? Would it change the momentum, be enough to force it off the rails? If it was forced off the rails, are there any bystanders? Would those bystanders get hurt too? Are there more than just 6 lives at stake? Amusing the trolley does go off the rails once it hits either the 5 people or the 1. Would the engine take too much damage and explode? If it explode, would it kill everyone? And all these questions were for naught. Izuku just doesn't know, and while it might be tasteless, he needs to know who is potentially killing. Him pulling the lever or simply ignoring it would make him an associate to their deaths or an active murderer should he choose a sidetrack. And if he's going to get in trouble either way once the hero police shows up, he'd rather have understanding of who he was going to jail for. Let's say that all of the people are the same. They've contributed the same amount to society. They all have families, they all work, they all have friends. Stuff like that. If they were all the same, Izuku wouldn't hold any specific transgression against them. He would just try to flip the lever and save one person. But then again, he's also never need to know how fast he was going in this situation. He'd need to know how fast the trolley was going. He'd need to know a number of things, which brings him to the next solution: a simple board the trolley and hit the emergency brake. But this in his mind, he'd never need to know the distance between himself and a trolley, as well as the distance between the trolley and the potential victims. He'd need to know how quickly he would even find the emergency brake on board. He'd need to know even more for this option to work out. And then there's the final solution. Izuku's board the trolley and purposely runs it off the tracks, killing only himself and all 6 people. All 6 almost victims are safe. That would be a logical solution. It would only require him to run towards the trolley and make sure he didn't hit any of the people on track when he's all good to go. Something tells Aizawa-sensei wouldn't appreciate him those solutions though, even though he's still writing them down, but the man had said They were free to ask the most absurd questions in this class and write out everything that came to mind. If only they feel their own moral compass at this point. With that in mind, Izuku raised his hand and slowly listens to Aizawa's soft chuckle coming from Denki. Listens to the soft chuckles coming from Denki and grinned as Aizawa just sighed and pointed to him. Here's my first issue, Aizawa. And this is the end of this fic. So, yeah. There's I think a part 2 to this. I'm not sure though. I don't know if it's linked or not. It might be. All I know, it's called Candy Paint on his brand new Hearse. I might read it, and if it's linked, then we'll know. Just let me know if you guys want me to read it. But yeah. So this is what it is. Sorry this took me longer than expected. Every time I tried reading it, I just kind of would start yawning too much, and I found it would be annoying to listen to, so I just kind of said yeah. So yeah, sorry. Anyway, I hope you guys had a wonderful night, day, evening. Sorry for the late posting, and I hope you guys enjoyed. Love you. Bye.